How could a people from thousands of years ago describe a machine that flew long before the Wright brothers, before Da Vinci's sketches? Even before iron tools were common, and yet buried within the ancient Sanskrit texts of India, there are vivid, electrifying descriptions of just that flying machines, called Vimanas, that could soar through the sky, traverse the oceans, and even venture into space. They weren't just poetic metaphors or chariots pulled by invisible horses. No, these were metal-clad, engine-powered vehicles that hissed, roared, and glowed with energy. Some texts described them emitting mercurial vapor. Others said they blazed like fire. They carried kings, gods, and warriors, and sometimes they rained destruction from above. This is the truth they never taught you in school. Most historians wave it off as symbolic. But the descriptions are too precise, too mechanical, too technological. And it raises a haunting question. Did ancient Indian sages have access to advanced knowledge that was later lost or deliberately hidden? As is written in the Rig Veda, a voice might whisper, "The gods flew in fiery chariots, with wheels of light and wings of thunder." Picture this: an ancient map, brittle and burned at the edges, unfolding to reveal a strange spiral. An old manuscript shows a flying craft, bulbous and round, like a modern UFO surrounded by flames. Statues of gods seated in thrones. But their thrones look more like cockpits. Could these be blueprints, not myths? In this video, we're going to uncover the lost science behind the Vimanas, the ancient flying machines of India. What powered them? Who flew them? And how could their descriptions be so eerily advanced? And if you love uncovering ancient truths, subscribe now, because the next discovery might change everything you know. Now imagine this. You're not lying in your bed anymore. You're standing barefoot on hot stone on a high plateau in ancient India. The sun has just risen. And before you, sitting silently like a sleeping beast, is a massive object, round, metallic, humming softly. It gleams in the sun. You can smell burnt oil, something sharp like ozone. You don't know the word for engine, but you know what you're seeing is not of this earth. The ancient texts begin with awe. In the Rig Veda, one of the oldest known texts on earth, dated over 3,000 years ago, there are references to chariots that roar, which move through the sky like lightning. These aren't passing metaphors. The descriptions include details: multiple compartments, viewing windows, propulsion systems. A passage from the Samarangana Sutradhara, an 11th century Sanskrit treatise, states, "Strong and durable must the body of the Vimana be made, like a great flying bird of a light material. Inside, one must place the mercury engine with its iron heating apparatus beneath." How could such concepts exist in a society that supposedly had no concept of combustion engines? And yet there's more. In the Mahabharata, a sprawling epic written over 2,000 years ago, there are passages of celestial vehicles that could move in all directions, up, down, forward, backward, and that were as fast as thought. One king is described flying his Vimana over great distances in moments, a feat no horse-drawn chariot could achieve. You might wonder, maybe these were divine symbols, not literal machines. That's the mainstream answer. But here's the twist. These texts don't describe dreams or visions. They describe real battles, real journeys, specific dimensions, construction instructions. The ancients weren't just dreaming, they were documenting. And then comes the image that haunts every researcher who has dared look deeper. A Vimana shooting fire at a city from the sky, leveling towers, boiling rivers, and turning night into blazing day. The effect described radiation. Hair and nails fell out. Food was contaminated. People threw themselves into rivers to cleanse. This sounds less like fantasy and more like a nuclear event. Historians still argue whether these accounts are metaphorical, exaggerated poetry, or distorted memory of real technologies. But as you picture ancient engineers hunched over palm leaf blueprints, mixing mercury, drawing sacred symbols on metal hulls, what do you believe? Remember, this is India. the land of zero Ayurveda astronomical observatories and temples aligned to constellations with laser precision. The same civilization that mapped the movement of the stars, while Europeans still thought the Earth was flat. So the idea of aerodynamic vehicles powered by some forgotten form of energy is not as impossible as we've been taught. And here's something curious. Ancient carvings show beings seated in cross-legged postures, but not on thrones on strange circular platforms. Dome-like objects hovering above temples. Stories of gods descending from the sky in burning ships. Even the name Vimana later came to mean palace or temple, as if the memory of these machines was slowly absorbed into the sacred. You might even say temples became grounded Vimanas, earthbound versions of sky palaces that once flew. But the question remains, where did this knowledge come from? Was it human invention, divine gift? Or a remnant of something far older perhaps, from a lost civilization undestroyed, buried and forgotten? You're standing at the edge of an abyss. A knowledge so vast, so contradictory to our timelines, that accepting it would require rewriting history books. And as we move forward deeper into the ancient manuscripts and forbidden diagrams, the story will only grow stranger. Look again at that Vedic verse. He mounted his Vimana shining like the sun and flew across the sky as a hawk soars. You close your eyes. The sound of wind, a pulse in the air, the deep rumble of something mechanical, ancient and alive. Not just a myth, but memory. You step deeper into the chamber of forgotten knowledge. The air smells of dust and ink. Before you lies a fragile manuscript, its pages yellowed with age, its characters curling like smoke. You're staring at one of the most controversial texts in the entire history of Sanskrit literature, the Vaimanika Shastra. Translated, its name means science of aeronautics. But it's more than that. This is not a mythic poem, not a religious chant. It is quite plainly a technical manual, one that describes how to construct, navigate, and weaponize Vimanas. And that changes everything. The Vaimanika Shastra surfaced publicly in 1952, after being dictated in the early 20th century by a man named Subbaraya Shastri, who claimed to have channeled it through spiritual means, connecting with ancient sages. He was uneducated, barely literate, yet what he delivered was over 3,000 Sanskrit verses describing complex flying machines down to the metals used, the fuels needed, even the controls inside the cockpit. The document outlines 4 types of Vimanas, each with unique capabilities. Some were saucer-shaped, others resembled pyramids or towers. One was said to disappear entirely from sight, another to traverse dimensions. But here's the part that will make your breath catch. It lists materials not known to modern science at the time. It describes alloys that resist heat and pressure, metals that become transparent, mirrors that deflect light in strange ways. One passage refers to an electric generator powered by solar rays centuries before solar panels were even imagined. Critics say the Vaimanika Shastra is a fabrication, that it was created in the 1900s, drawing upon modern ideas. But here's the problem with that theory. Some of the technologies described hadn't even been invented yet. Certain concepts, like anti-gravity and gyroscopic stabilization, wouldn't appear in science fiction until decades later. So how could a man with no scientific training invent this entire system? Out of thin air. Mainstream historians scoff. Coincidence, they say. Fantasy. But alternative researchers see something else. A blueprint. A whisper of forgotten genius. Maybe even a memory encoded deep within India's collective consciousness. One diagram in particular has fascinated scholars and mystics alike. It shows a Vimana with a rotating energy core surrounded by concentric rings. Each ring is labeled with esoteric terms, symbols for heat, magnetism, ether. And at the very center, a spiral, the ancient sign of movement through space-time, or something else. This is where things turn truly strange. The manuscript doesn't stop at machines. It describes piloting protocols, what a Vimana pilot should wear, eat, and even think. Emotional control breathing exercises and mental clarity are emphasized as if these machines responded not just to levers and wheels, but to the consciousness of the operator. That notion that machines could interface with mind and spirit is only now being explored in modern neurotechnology. But here it is in a text over 1,000 years old. It makes you wonder, was the Vimana a craft or a living vehicle? A hybrid of machine and soul. There's more. In the section titled Mantrika, it speaks of sound-based control systems, chanting specific frequencies to activate propulsion. In other words, sonic technology. Vibrational keys, something not so far from what Tesla once hinted at. One line reads, "By uttering the 9 seed sounds, the aerial car shall rise like the bird defying the earth." Could this be sacred geometry in motion? Could mantras so often dismissed as spiritual superstition have once been used to operate real physical devices? Historians still argue whether the Vaimanika Shastra is a modern hoax or a transmission from a bygone age. But the text has survived. It's there in libraries. You can read it, touch it, examine the drawings, and no one, not even its harshest critics, can explain how its technical tone feels so authentic, so detailed in its obsessions from aerodynamics to anti-gravity mechanics. It even contains rules for aerial combat, defensive maneuvers, evasion patterns, countermeasures against heat rays and smoke screens. These aren't just metaphors. They're battlefield tactics for the skies. Now step back and ask, why would anyone thousands of years ago invent all this? No other mythological text in the world goes into such operational detail about flying machines, not Egyptian, not Greek, not Norse. Only here in the Indian tradition do we find this level of aerospace specificity. It's almost as if this wasn't fiction, but a technical legacy, one meant to be preserved until mankind was ready to remember. And remember this, the Vaimanika Shastra claims its knowledge was handed down from the ancient sage Bharadwaja, one of India's most revered rishis, who lived in a time when the gods still walked the earth. Could he have been an engineer priest, a keeper of lost technology? Was his wisdom really science cloaked in the language of the divine? Perhaps the Shastra is a reconstruction echoes of an older, greater text now lost. Or perhaps it is exactly what it says. It is a technical manual from a forgotten age, dictated in trance, preserved against all odds. Now imagine again you are inside the Vimana. You sit cross-legged, your hands, not on a steering wheel, but resting on copper rings. You breathe slowly. Around you, lights pulse in response. The machine listens not to your voice, but your intention. You sing a single tone, and the craft hums to life. Wind swirls around you. Stones lift from the ground. And without any roar or fire, the Vimana rises silently, impossibly into the sky. This is not just mythology. This is design. You're flying now, not in a dream, but in the thick of an ancient war. Below, kingdoms rise and fall. Rivers run red. Cities burn. But you're not watching from the ground. You're inside a Vimana, and what unfolds around you is not a mythic poem. It's a battle that echoes modern warfare with eerie precision. In the epic Mahabharata, considered one of the longest and most complex works of literature ever written, there are scenes so astonishing, so wildly out of place in their technological sophistication that they defy easy explanation. And perhaps none is more infamous than this one. A single projectile charged with all the power of the universe, an incandescent column of smoke and flame as bright as 10,000 suns. It reduced the enemy to ashes. The hair and nails of the survivors fell out. Food became poisoned. Birds turned white. What is this passage describing? To any modern reader, it sounds uncannily like a nuclear explosion. Radiation sickness, fallout, blinding light, the lingering sickness of the earth itself. And yet, this was written over 2,000 years ago, long before atomic theory, radiation, or uranium were ever known. Historians debate this passage constantly. It's poetic exaggeration, some say, a cosmic metaphor. But what if it's not? What if it's a record of real events passed down through centuries, their language clothed in myth to conceal a terrifying truth? The Mahabharata tells us of celestial battles wars in the sky, where Vimanas maneuvered like fighter jets, unleashing weapons that shattered mountains, melted cities, and darkened the heavens. One passage describes a Vimana being hurled into the sky like a comet trailing fire and sound. Another describes a weapon called the Agneya Astra, a fire weapon released from above that caused wind and thunder flames and destruction. It is tempting, dangerously tempting, to see these not as myths, but as eyewitness reports fragmented by time and retold through the lens of religion and legend. Now imagine a battlefield. 2 Vimanas circling overhead. Below, armored elephants scream as fire rains from above. The earth quakes not from magic, but from something mechanical, something that used sound, heat, perhaps even vibrational frequency as a weapon. And not all the texts are poetic. Some are disturbingly surgical. The Ramayana, another Indian epic, contains references to specific maneuvers. One Vimana dodges another's attack by ascending into the sun's glare, a classic evasive tactic used by modern pilots. Another hides behind cloud cover, re-emerging with a surprise strike. These are not literary flourishes. These are combat tactics. The gods themselves seem like pilots. Vishnu riding his Garuda, a flying beast with metal wings. Indra thundering through the sky in a golden chariot that glows with fire. But peel back the metaphor. What if Garuda was a transport vehicle? What if Indra's chariot was a weaponized Vimana? And then there are the cities in the sky, floating fortresses mentioned in several ancient texts. The Tripura, for example. 3 aerial cities aligned in orbit, said to have been destroyed in a single coordinated attack. Could this be an allegory for orbital weapon systems? Satellites, space-based platforms. Scholars roll their eyes. It's allegory, they say. Just spiritual metaphor. But what if it's both? What if the ancient writers saw advanced technology and interpreted it the only way they knew how, by elevating it to the realm of gods? After all, what is a god to a person who's never seen electricity, metal flight, or explosion? You might say a god is simply a being with technology far beyond your own. There's another mystery. Certain regions of India, especially around Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh, show traces of extreme radiation in the soil. In one area near Jodhpur, a housing development was abandoned when scientists discovered high radiation levels in the ground. Locals speak of a curse that destroyed an ancient city. There are no craters, no known volcanic activity, just silence and the residue of something devastating. Was there a war fought here long before recorded history? One not with spears and arrows, but with weapons of pure energy. The Vaimanika Shastra even references weapons that use mirrors to focus heat beams and devices that generate shock waves through vibration. These sound like crude laser systems or sonic cannons, ideas only now being developed in military laboratories. And here's the strange part. These weapons aren't described as divine gifts. They're engineered, built, deployed. The gods didn't snap their fingers. They piloted Vimanas. They had cruise machines protocols. So now we're left with a terrifying implication. Ancient India may have possessed or preserved knowledge of a technological civilization that predated the historical record. One capable of building flying machines, deploying energy weapons, and even manipulating atomic forces. What happened to it? Some say it self-destructed. Others believe it was wiped out by a natural disaster, floods, tectonic shifts, or even an asteroid. And then there are whispers of intervention, that this technology was not of Earth at all, but gifted or stolen from a higher source. But regardless of origin, the message is clear. We were not always primitive. There were times, perhaps cycles, when humanity soared and crashed. You are standing now in the ruins of a battlefield. The war is long over, The sand has swallowed the bones, but the sky still holds the memory of the machines that once lit it on fire. And deep within the earth, beneath layers of history, and forgetting the truth sleeps. Can you hear it? The soft pulse. The ancient engines still humming, not a myth. In memory, the sun rises over the temple city of Khajuraho, casting golden light across sandstone towers carved with impossible precision. From above, these temples look almost too perfectly arranged, like they weren't placed randomly, but with cosmic intent. From the ground, they're beautiful. From the sky, they're mathematical. Now ask yourself, were these ancient temples only places of worship? Or could they have served another purpose entirely? Because when you look closer, when you study the geometry, the layout, even the materials, something strange begins to emerge. A pattern, a design. And at the center of it all is the persistent idea that these were not just shrines to gods, but land-based counterparts to the flying Vimanas described in the texts. Temples as terminals, launchpads, energy stations. This is where the story of the Vimanas intersects, not with poetry, but with architecture. Let's begin in Thanjavur, at the Brihadiswarar temple, built over 1,000 years ago. Its central tower weighs over 80 tons, and yet it was somehow lifted and placed 200 feet high. The builders claimed it was guided by celestial vision. But there's something even stranger. The temple's internal passages are aligned not to religious symbols, but to astronomical markers, equinoxes, solstices, magnetic north. Why? Some believe these alignments were more than symbolic. They were functional, like navigation beacons for something in the sky. And then there are the stepwells, giant inverted pyramids dug deep into the earth across northern India. Their purpose is said to be simple water storage, but many are so elaborately designed with layers of descending geometry that they resemble cooling chambers or launch pits. Could they have served as hangars for Vimanas when not in flight? You walk the long steps downward and feel the temperature shift. The air becomes denser. A strange hum, almost imperceptible, rises as you descend. Not water. Resonance. This is what researchers have begun to suspect, that ancient Indian architecture was tuned vibrationally magnetically to interact with energy. And at the heart of many temples is the Garbhagriha, the womb chamber. A sealed dark room where no sound enters and where the lingam or energy pillar resides. Could this be symbolic or literal a core, where energy was focused and perhaps even channeled into flight? In Ellora, a complex of caves carved from a single rock face, one temple Kailasa was not built, but carved downward from the top of the mountain to the base. Over 200,000 tons of rock were removed, with no records of tools or scaffolding. Why the symmetry is near perfect, even though it was built backwards. And remember, the Vimanas described construction methods, carving lightweight alloys using fire and sound to manipulate matter. Perhaps Ellora wasn't only a temple. Perhaps it was an interface, a meeting point between the ground and sky. Across India, the use of sacred geometry is everywhere. Mandalas, lotus grids, the Sri Yantra. A complex geometric figure said to represent the universe is also eerily similar to electromagnetic field diagrams. Could these patterns be ancient blueprints, not just spiritual maps? Let's go further. In Rajasthan, stone platforms have been discovered with burn patterns and circular indentations. Too shallow for rituals, too symmetrical for chants. Locals say they were where the gods landed. And in the south, some temples feature metallic discs embedded in stone, their function unknown. Always near the top, always facing skyward. If these structures interacted with aerial vehicles, how? One theory, resonance. That sound vibration and magnetic fields were used to either stabilize or launch Vimanas. The ancient texts speak of vortex motion of flying machines that respond to mantras. Could it be that these mantras activated something within the structure of the temples themselves? In other words, the entire temple was part of the machine. Modern scientists are only beginning to understand the principles of resonant frequencies, how certain frequencies can reduce gravity, affect matter, even lift objects. Yet here, embedded in temple design, are shapes and materials tuned to those same frequencies. Granite, for instance, contains quartz, a crystal, capable of storing and transmitting energy. Many Indian temples are built almost entirely of it. And at key junctions, copper rods, iron nails, gold plating. Not decorative, but conductive. You begin to see the larger picture. Not all temples were for prayer. Some were machines. And then comes the iconography carvings of gods and sages riding cloud chariots, thunderbirds, golden discs. Sometimes they point upward. Other times, they descend from sky to mountain. The flying machines of the gods aren't just described. They are etched in stone, preserved for the eye that knows how to see. Historians still argue whether these symbols are literal or metaphorical. But what if they're functional diagrams encoded to survive time invasion and censorship? What if the temples were keys left behind to be reactivated by those who remember? You're standing now inside a garbhagriha. The walls are cold. The air is still. A single shaft of light falls on the stone lingam. And for a moment, you hear it not with your ears, but with your bones. A low, perfect frequency, like a machine long asleep, still dreaming of the skies. So now we've walked among sacred towers and ancient airfields. We've heard the thunder of forgotten engines and stood in the very chambers where the sky once touched stone. But the question remains the one that haunts every whisper of the Vimanas. Was it all real? Or is this a dream retold too many times? The debate is fierce. Mainstream scholars lean hard into metaphor. These are spiritual journeys, they insist. A Vimana is a symbol, not a ship. And yes, in many cases, the texts are poetic radiant with allegory and divine vision, but they miss something vital. Machines do not require belief. They require understanding. And something about the Vimanas doesn't quite fit the category of myth. There's too much engineering, too much language of assembly propulsion calculation. It's like opening a Bible and finding instructions for a satellite. And when you piece together the shattered fragments, epic versus stone carvings, temple blueprints, obscure manuscripts, a shape begins to form. Not a complete machine, perhaps, but a silhouette, a possibility, a mystery that behaves like a memory fossilized in culture. Take the Pushpaka Vimana, for example, described in the Ramayana as resembling the sun capable of carrying many passengers. It had windows. It hovered. It flew without wings. If it's only a dream, why such detail? And what of the Vaimanika Shastra, written down or perhaps remembered centuries after the original knowledge was lost? Why does it contain dozens of pages of construction specifications, materials, flight, characteristics? It all begins to feel like a warning, a trace, like something ancient and powerful had once existed and was either buried by disaster or buried on purpose. The deeper mystery may not be whether Vimanas existed, but why they were forgotten. Many ancient cultures speak of a time when the gods fled the earth, when the sky became still. The Mayans, the Sumerians, even the Aboriginal Australians tell tales of flying beings of machines that carved the clouds and then disappeared, as if there had been a shared loss, a civilizational amnesia. And India may be the last culture still holding the thread, because India didn't just bury its myths. It ritualized them, it sang them, carved them, hid them in temple walls, passed them down through mudras dances, songs encoded, encrypted, eternal. It's possible that the Vimanas were never meant to be rebuilt, but remembered, a kind of seed memory, waiting. Others speculate even more boldly that the ancient world was seeded with knowledge, not invented, but inherited. From what source? Atlantean survivors, extraterrestrial visitors, a vanished human civilization far older than the Vedas themselves. Historians still argue whether Atlantis, Lemuria, or Rama's empire were real. But what's curious is how similar their technologies sound. Flying ships, energy weapons, crystalline power, temples with electromagnetic cores. The same motifs echoed across continents. What if they weren't separate stories, but the same story told in different tongues? Even Egypt's Djed pillar, often seen as a mystical spine or column of power, echoes the Vimana's central axis in the Vaimanika Shastra. Both described as energy channels, both aligned with sky and earth, both connected to life motion flight. Coincidence or resonance? Here is one more detail that should not be ignored. In 2014, during routine excavations near an old temple in Bihar, a team uncovered strange metallic remnants in a sealed underground chamber. At first, it was dismissed, but one archaeologist swore the material was unlike any alloy he'd handled, light heat resistant with magnetic properties. Then, the story vanished. No follow-up, no public report. Just silence. This pattern discovery, followed by disappearance, is repeated often in the world of forbidden archaeology. Ancient batteries in Iraq, strange gears beneath pyramids, and the Vimanas still waiting, their silence growing louder. But the most haunting part is not what we find. It's what we almost remember. Because even now in meditation, some practitioners report visions of flying machines, spirals of fire, towers glowing with light, dream fragments that feel older than their own lifetimes. Could it be that these memories are encoded not in stone, but in our very consciousness? You see, ancient India never separated science from spirit. To them, engineering was sacred. Energy was divine. Sound was not just for music, it was a tool to move the world. The boundary between the machine and the mind was fluid. So the Vimanas perhaps were not just vehicles. They were bridges between heaven and earth, between man and God, between history and the stars. You're standing now at the edge of time. The temple behind you is quiet. The sky is clear. And somewhere just beyond sight, an engine hums faintly, waiting to wake. Not myth, not legend, but a technology forgotten. Not forever. So if Vimanas really soared above the earth, gleaming with unknown metals, pulsing with energy, navigating through the sky like thoughts through the mind, then everything we thought we knew about ancient civilizations must be reconsidered. These weren't just temples or stories. They were machines of memory, devices that blurred the line between science and soul, between reality and the realm we call myth. And even if you're not sure, if you're still wondering what parts were real, what parts were poetic, one thing is certain: the people who wrote these texts saw something, knew something, remembered something. They left us clues in stone, in syllable, diagram, and dream. But this is only one piece of a much larger puzzle. Because across the earth, beneath the sands of Egypt, in the Andes of South America, hidden in the sunken ruins off the coast of India, there are more artifacts, more symbols, more machines waiting to be unearthed. And together they point toward a lost world, a vanished knowledge, a shared inheritance, one we were never meant to forget. If this kind of truth speaks to you, if you feel the pull of the ancient and the forbidden, then subscribe now, because we're just getting started. There's more they never told us, and we're going to uncover it piece by piece. And if the Vimanas were once real, what else have we mistaken for myth? So close your eyes now. Let the image linger, a temple humming under the stars, a craft rising silently, a whisper of wind stirred by forgotten wings. The ancients called it a Vimana, and perhaps one day you will too.